Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the podcast that I, your host, David Woodruff, lovingly call the Woodruff Report. Welcome to a special Thursday matinee edition of the Woodruff Report. We have to check the files, but I believe that this is the first time I have ever recorded on a Thursday. It's exciting. There's a whole different vibe. I just feel more alive. Just kidding. It feels exactly the same. But either way, at least I've found a way to make this a landmark edition of the Woodruff Report. So enough meaningless talk. What are we going to cover today on the Woodruff Report? We are going to delve into the NBA playoffs. Most series have played the first two games. Game 3s are coming up. The Game 3 of Sixers Heat is going on as I speak. The Warriors and Spurs play later tonight, as do the Pelicans and Trailblazers. But the series have now shifted for all series. The top seed have played their two games at home. The series now shifts to the away team's building, and many teams are in dire need of a few wins, and other favored teams need to get a game in, and they are probably set on going to the second round. Lots to play for, lots of exciting series. This year promised much more excitement than we've seen the previous 2 or 3 years in the NBA playoffs, and it has lived up to its billing with a few very, very, very entertaining playoff series and some surprises, which is welcome surprises, seeing as the last 3-4 years have been anything but surprising as it's been Warriors, Cavs, the trilogy. So, besides a little NBA, it is draft season. The 49ers get to take in a new crop of talent. Excitement is at an all-time high for the teams that had losing or miserable records last year. This is the time of year where fans can get excited, prospect maybe a front office taking a difference maker and propelling a team to an improved record. I'm looking at you, Cleveland Browns, who, we say it every year, but can you really mess up in this year's draft with such a deep well of QB talent and also some generational talents in Saquon Barkley, Bradley Chubb, some very good athletic freaks, as people like to call them, and they have the 1st and 4th overall pick. Can you mess it up? If anyone could, Cleveland could, but we'll just have to see. Draft is exciting, but we are going to highlight the 49ers, who have the number 9 overall pick in this draft, because after all, this is a Bay Area podcast, so we like talking about our Bay Area teams. So we'll talk about what the 49ers' needs are, who we think they are going to pick, and names that could come up. Let's talk some sports. Let's do it on the Woodruff Report. Let's go basketball, let's talk NBA, and let's talk NFL draft. Get ready, buckle up, you're in for a wild ride. Woodruff Report, starting in 3, 2, 1. NBA playoffs are heating up, and that means that basketball is being played at an extremely high level. So I'm not going to go into statistics here, like how many points people scored and all that. I'm going to go more broad because we are only 2 games into these NBA series. So what are the themes that we can extract from the series that have been played so far? As usual, we're going to start in the Eastern Conference, and we're going to start with the 1v8, which was going to be an exciting Raptors versus Wizards matchup. In the first 2 games at the Air Canada Centre in front of a rowdy Toronto crowd, the Raptors were able to handle business against a sneaky good Wizards 8 seed. This was a matchup between 2 teams who are perennial playoff chokers, you could say, who seem to play so well during the regular season but not get it done in the postseason. roles were similar and also the same this year. The Raptors locked up that 1 seed, having a very good regular season. This is not the Toronto team of the past few years. You've got DeRozan and Lowry, of course, but you've got a deep bench, the best in the NBA, and you've got capable players playing alongside the two co-stars who have struggled in playoffs. And speaking of co-stars who have struggled when it comes to playoff time, the Wizards have two of their own in John Wall and Bradley Beal. Now, the Wizards cannot boast to have the same success this year as the Raptors were, sneaking into the playoffs with that 8 seed. They lost John Wall for most of the season with injuries, but he has been back for playoff time. So what have we seen so far in this series? And the story has been the Raptors being able to completely shut down Beal and Wall. They've gotten a few points here and there, but in general, the Raptors have been able to keep them contained, and Lowry and DeRozan have been playing good basketball. These last 2 or 3 years, they've been liable to score like 15 points combined. This year, they are putting up and making shots better than they have before, and that bench has really come in handy. These role players are helping out. Washington has not really been able to have an answer on the defensive end. They are not a defensively gifted team by any stretch, and they've struggled to both prevent the Raptors from scoring and scoring themselves. And that's a recipe for disaster when the other team's scoring and you cannot keep up. So, the Raptors lead this series 2-0, with the series now shifting to Washington, where the Wizards will have some work to do. They'll have the crowd behind them, though, and the Raptors are not as good a road team as a home team, which is a theme that is shared amongst NBA teams. But the series shifts, and Washington is in dire need of a few dubs to narrow the gap in this series, which the Raptors are running away with currently. Let's transition now to the 2 versus 7 game. The Celtics lead the Bucks currently 2-0. This is a depleted Celtics team against a good, young, long Bucks team. A Bucks team that was expected by a few to maybe pull an upset in this first round series. Myself included, the Woodruff Report had picked the Bucks to win this series and progress to the second round. The Bucks have not been able to get it done so far in this series, but it has not been from a lack of trying. Game 1 was probably the best game that we have seen so far in the postseason. We saw an incredible finish to the game in which the Celtics looked to have won but missed free throws, give the Bucks a chance. The ball is inbounded and a deep 3 from a Milwaukee player. It goes, and we're going to overtime. However, the Celtics dominated the overtime period, eventually beating the Bucks by 6. Game 1 was a game during which, in regulation at least, both teams were struggling to make shots, which favors the Bucks, who have some good players but are not a terrific offensive team. They're not going to be able to win those games when the opponent scores 120 points. We saw that happen in Game 2, where the Celtics were getting their shots to go, and the Bucks couldn't keep pace. Giannis has been relatively shut down as much as you can shut down Giannis so far in a series, and the Celtics' defense has really been the story so far in this series. It has strangled the Bucks, and the Bucks they don't have a ton of playoff experience. They've sort of crept in previous years, and they've got some young players in Middleton, Jabari Parker, Giannis, who is still young. He may not seem like it, but he's still a young player, so not a ton of playoff experience, and it's shown for the Bucks, who have struggled to beat an injury-depleted Celtics team, who are playing good basketball behind a few first and second players of their own in Jaylen Brown and company. So, again, the Celtics using their home court advantage. There's always the mojo of playing in Boston on the parquet floor. There's always some lore and history in that building. Opponents seem to struggle there in the playoffs. So the Celtics lead this series 2-0, but the series transitions back to what will definitely be a rowdy Milwaukee crowd. And in my opinion, if the Bucks have any chance of achieving the upset that so many, including myself, had predicted prior to this series, they must win these next 2 games at home, because it does not look like they're going to win away at Boston. Now, there is plenty of basketball to be played, and I could be wrong, but this is just my initial impression from watching the series. Moving on to the 3 versus 6 seed game, I should say, which is LeBron and his Cavs against the Pacers. And in this series, we had our first upset as the Pacers went into Believe Land and won the first game of this series. Victor Oladipo was the best player on the floor for large parts of this game, but this game will really be characterized by the Cavs' inability to score. It was, as it so often has been, the LeBron show. He seemed to be the only one to get it in the bucket, and his rotating cast of rotational players could not get the job done as the Pacers blew out the Cavs in Game 1 of this series in Cleveland. There were actually some boos heard after the game at Quicken Loans Arena by the Cleveland crowd. That's how disgusted they were by this first-round performance. Now, James did put up good numbers, but he had an awful plus-minus in this game. You can't fault him. He's played so well down the stretch. He is definitely worthy of having an off game or two. This just came at a unfortunate time because so many players on the Cavs team had a bad game all simultaneously, and that's how you get beat by 18 against a Pacers team that didn't even score 100 points. They won this game 98-80, Cleveland only putting up 80 points. After the game, Coach Ty Lue of the Cavs said LeBron is going to need to be more aggressive at the beginning of the games, and many took this to be, is there some dissension in the locker room? No matter. In Game 2, LeBron scores the first 16 points that the Cavs score, and he outscores the Pacers by himself in the first quarter, and the Cavs, although this game is closer, you would expect after the blowout that we saw in the first half that this game was a blowout throughout. The Pacers stuck with it, and they've got a good team. It's not just the Victor Oladipo show. They've got some good players. Even Lance Stevenson, for some reason, when he appears in Indiana, he can just flounder everywhere else and be this awful player throughout the NBA, and then he comes back to Indiana and he's this magical player somehow. Something in the water in Indianapolis. But this Pacers team is good, and they've played this Cavs team tough, and any of this sort of, the Cavs are just going to turn it on when it comes playoff time, any of that kind of thoughts have those notions have been dispelled. This Cavs team is not very good, and it will be an achievement for them to get out of the East with these much improved teams, but mostly the fact that the Cavs are just not very improved. They are not as good as they have been in previous years. This team that was pretty much overhauled midway through the season it does take some time for a team to mesh together and figure out how to play with one another. And so when you've basically had 2 different teams in one season, it must be a nightmare to coach. And you can see it sometimes with these lousy displays every now and again. So this series is tied 1-1 going back to Indiana. And if Indiana can take 1 or 2 of these games, it'll make this series very interesting because now you've got that game 5, 6, 7 where it's changing home and away every game. So now that gets very interesting. Anything can happen. And as series wear on, players get tired, anything can happen. And then if you can get to a game 7, all hell breaks loose. So our first very entertaining series that I've talked about, the Cavs and Pacers are tied at 1-1 going into Game 3 in Indiana. Finally, our final Eastern Conference matchup pits the 76ers, the 4 seed, against the Miami Heat, the 5 seed. This is another very exciting series. It is deadlocked at 1-1. Game 3 is occurring as I speak. Last time I checked, the Sixers were up, but it is not halftime yet. No matter, let's talk about what has happened before we talk about what is happening. First game was a blowout. The young Sixers looked hungry and ready for the playoffs even without Joel Embiid. Ben Simmons looked like the truth. JJ Redick was knocking down threes willy-nilly, and the Sixers were able to put up 130 en route to an absolute rout of the Miami Heat. And now we're thinking, uh-oh. Of course, many experts in their hot takes, the Sixers are the new favorites to get out of the East after the Game 1 performance. Well, let's pump the brakes here really quick, Senor sports analyst, and let's watch this series play out because we've only played one game, and sure enough, Game 2, the Heat come back, and propelled by a vintage D-Wade performance, getting buckets in the clutch over and over and over again, the Heat are able to even this series going back to South Beach and make it very interesting, and now, well, maybe the Sixers aren't the favorites to get out of the East. Well, we told you, Senor sports analyst, maybe if you stopped doing your hot takes, we could have a good sports conversation. Anywho, this Game 2 was definitely the Dwayne Wade show. He turned back the clock. It reminded me of like 2007 all over again, where D Wade can just take over a game. Of course, he can't really do that anymore. He's not going to put in Game 2 performances for an entire series, but he's good for a game or two here and there, and I'm sure anyone would love to have him on their playoff roster because of what he can do and what he's capable of. And he was a magician late in this game. Whenever the Sixers would make a run to get sort of back into it, he'd hit one to silence the crowd. He sort of had a back and forth going with Kevin Hart, which is awesome, who was sitting courtside for Philadelphia. And this is going to be another exciting series as it transitions back to South Beach, where the Heat have been very good this season at home. And now the Sixers, maybe a little bit of doubt creeping into their mind. These guys got us, and now we have to play at their place. We're the higher seed, and then doubt, it can cripple you. Joel Embiid, after Game 2, posted this sort of cryptic Instagram message where he says, like, I'm tired of being babied. So is that him being competitive and wanting to get out there, or is that him actually in sort of a tug-of-war with the trainers and the front office? We don't really know, but just another list of worries for Brett Brown and this Philadelphia 76ers team as the series transitions back to South Beach. 1-1 as we go to Miami. Let's go out to the wild, wild west, where the series have been equally as entertaining so far, and let's start with the mighty Houston Rockets in the 1 seed, who have a 2-0 lead over the Minnesota Timberwolves. Game 1 was a very, very good game, and the Rockets looked a tad unsure of themselves out there. They weren't maybe pressing a little too much when they are at their best. They're really just playing that relaxed basketball. James Harden pick and roll at the top, kicking out to a lethal three-point shooter, shooting a three himself. They were pressing a little bit, and this allowed Minnesota to stay in the game. But ultimately, the Rockets were able to pull out the Game 1 win. Game 2, they looked a lot more relaxed, and they just hammered the Timberwolves as they'd been hammering teams all season. This looks like for all the world like it's going to be a sweep, but the game does transition back to Minnesota, and Karl Anthony Towns and Jimmy Butler are both tremendous players. Andrew Wiggins is good for a heroic game here and there, so you never know what's going to happen. But it looks as though the T-Wolves will be ruining that close Game 1 loss, that 3-point loss, as what could have been, and the Rockets look for all the world like they're going to take this series pretty quickly. This series is 2-0. Game 3 will be played in Minnesota. Warriors Spurs, the 2 seed versus the 7 seed. This has been a better series than it looks like on paper. The Warriors lead this series 2-0, with the series transitioning back to San Antonio. Game 3 is today. Game 1, it was a Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant show, as it's going to have to be without Steph Curry in the lineup. And the only real takeaway that you could come away with from Game 1 is that these Spurs are just not very good. They were creating decently open shots. They just don't really have that dead eye, that team that'll just sink the nail into your heart as they've had in previous years. Their they're sort of both old and young at the same time. They don't really have anybody in their prime. They rely a lot on LaMarcus Aldridge, but the Warriors are able to send double and triple teams without fear of really any shooters on the Spurs punishing them from the outside, and that showed in game one as the Warriors were able to shut down LaMarcus Aldridge, and Klay Thompson had one of his games. What can you do when everything he shoots goes in, as the Warriors took game one handily in front of a raucous Oracle Arena? Game two, the cracks in the Warriors were evident, and it's that besides Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson, who are you going to get the points from? So the Spurs sent double teams to both of them, and pretty soon it was like the ball was sort of being forced into Draymond Green's hands, he's very streaky shooter, or it was even worse, ending up in like JaVale McGee and Kevon Looney's hands, who are not proven scorers, who everyone on Earth and Mars and Neptune know aren't going to take a shot. They're just going to try to find Klay or KD. What did this lead to? Led to a ton of transition threes in the first half from Kevin Durant, where he'd just pull up, not even attack the basket because he knew double and triples were coming if he tried to get in the paint. And the ball was ending up again in these young players' hands who are not proven scorers. And the Warriors without Steph Curry are not the same. Steph Curry makes it all go with his passing. Kevin Durant has good vision, but he doesn't run the point like Steph Curry can. And a few cracks were shown. I was watching this game and I thought the Warriors were going to lose based on their first half performance. They came out in the third quarter and Klay Thompson went on one of his runs where he just can't miss. KD was a little more assertive, not settling as much, and they were able to get enough from the surrounding players. David West had a good game, although he did tweak his ankle a little bit. We'll keep an eye on that. And I couldn't help but Patrick McCaw is really a key loss right now for the Warriors because he can stroke it from outside and he forces you to space at least a little bit, and he's not afraid to shoot either. Remember, he's been on the roster for these previous playoff runs. So Patrick McCaw is a big loss for the Warriors right now. But the way they're playing right now is enough to get the job done against a Spurs team that basically barely made it to the playoffs, and in my opinion, they're the worst playoff team in the West right now, even though they're not the 8 seed, they are the 7 seed. Warriors lead the series 2-0, game 3 in San Antonio. The 3 seed Trailblazers against the 6 seed Pelicans, and this has been the most surprising series so far, as the Pelicans have taken both games in Portland and lead this series 2-0, with the series heading back to New Orleans. Anthony Davis has played incredibly, and they've gotten enough guard play, the Pelicans have, from especially Drew Holiday in Game 2. They've gotten enough guard play to get the job done. Remember, the question with the Pelicans is never what's going on at power forward and center. They've got Boogie and Anthony Davis, although Boogie is injured. But they've got the big guys handled. They've got that situation handled. It's the guard play. It's the point guard. It's the shooting guard. Because in today's NBA, you really need shooters and someone facilitating to win. And the Pelicans have sort of played this old style of basketball, and they've been okay, but they haven't been able to really get over that first-round hump so far. But they're playing very well right now, and they've been able to take the first 2 games from the Trailblazers because they've severely limited Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, who are the Portland's obvious main 2 sources of points. It was an exciting game 1, which the Pelicans won in a low-scoring affair by 97-95. That sort of game definitely favors the Pelicans because they've got that inside star player, Anthony Davis, who they can get the ball to, and they're similar to Milwaukee in that they can't really stay with you if you score 120 points, which the Blazers are extremely capable of doing. But when you limit McCollum and Damian Lillard, then you've got a whole new series, and that's what we've seen so far. So this series is going to get interesting, especially if the Pelicans win Game 3, because now they're up 3-0, and you don't really see anybody coming back from that. So Game 3 is really a must-win for Portland, and they're going to need to probably take 2 in New Orleans, which is very hard to do in another team's arena to take 2, especially with the other team amped up playing in front of their home crowd. keep an eye out on this series because this may be our first upset of the postseason. And the Pelicans could actually get this series done quicker than many people imagine, because if they win Game 3, the wind is out of the sails of the Blazers, who are now, well, we're doomed now. And the Pelicans could even make this a sweep if they deflate the Blazers enough in Game 3. 2-0 Pelicans, and the series is shifting back to New Orleans. Our final series, the 4-seed Thunder, I should say, against the 5-seed Jazz. This has been another very exciting series. The Thunder took Game 1, and the bigger story here was Donovan Mitchell, Utah's star player, picked up a little bit of an injury. He begged his coach to stay in and did down the stretch, but the Thunder were ultimately too powerful for the Jazz in Game 1. This Thunder team is scary when they get going with Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, and Russell Westbrook. They've also got a very good big man in Steven Adams who can gobble up rebounds. Westbrook corrals rebounds very well too, and when they hit their shots, they're difficult to stop. They're also good defensively, which often gets overlooked. They're long at all the positions, especially Paul George, who's one of the best defenders in the NBA. And they were able to score enough, really, to take this game from the Jazz. This has been a very evenly matched and exciting series with a surprising Jazz team that people did not really expect to be playing this well in the postseason. Game 2, the Jazz took behind a very, very, very good performance from my Rookie of the Year, Donovan Mitchell. He was slashing and dashing. He hit this crazy clutch shot at the end of the game where he drives in, spins, and puts up a floater. I would be so dizzy I'd probably still be spinning, but he was able to have the body control to already be up in the air, putting a floater, and he just caressed it over the shot blocker for the Thunder and put it right in the basket. He was the story, proving why he's been such a revelation to the NBA in his first season. He's been playing his socks off, and he's able to do it not only during the regular season, but when the lights are brightest and the teams are playing their best defense in the postseason. This series is tied 1-1, and it's going back to Utah. And not only are the fans rowdy in Utah, but it's at altitude, so you have to deal with that. And Utah is usually very successful on their home court. They're well coached, and they will not let you score a bunch with Rudy Gobert in there contesting every shot. 1-1, and the Thunder have to be on their toes. This is going to be a dogfight. Do not expect this series to end in 5. We're looking at probably 6, maybe 7 in this series. So, that was a quick recap of the NBA playoffs so far. I guess a not very quick recap. The Raptors lead the Wizards 2-0. The Celtics lead the Bucks 2-0. The Cavs and Pacers are tied at 1-1, and the Heat and Sixers are also tied at 1-1. In the West, the Rockets lead the Timberwolves 2-0. The Warriors lead the Spurs 2-0. The Pelicans lead the Trailblazers 2-0. And the Thunder and Jazz are all squared up at 1. Keep an eye on these games. They're all good. Any series is good. So if it's on, watch it. It's good basketball, entertaining, pleasing to the eye. Let's transition now to the National Football League, the No Fun League, and talk about the NFL Draft. Specifically, what do the 49ers want to achieve out of this draft? They are picking 9th, which is sort of a good area to be in. Especially with the foundation that this team has in Jimmy Garoppolo and a young, explosive, exciting team, which will definitely be entertaining to watch in a very competitive NFC West, with the Rams looking like a super team, one of the best in the NFL. The Seahawks are always good, although they've looked a little more beatable these last few years. The Cardinals are not going to be very good, but the 49ers do have a shot at maybe a wild card, and who knows? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo has never lost to start, so maybe the 49ers are going to go 16-0, and all this talk is useless. Who knows? So, the first few picks of this draft are more than likely going to be quarterback picks. The Browns are likely to take a quarterback with the number 1 pick. The Giants are likely to take a quarterback with the number 2 pick. The Broncos look like they will take a quarterback with the number 5 pick. Saquon Barkley will probably be gone by those first few picks. There's going to be a lot of QB action, and don't be surprised if there are a few trade-ups by teams who are looking to nab one of these QBs early. The 49ers have the 9th pick, and they do not need a quarterback, which puts them in pole position for the other talented players in this draft, because with so many quarterbacks being taken, that means real difference makers are going to fall to the 49ers. What do the 49ers need? First and foremost, we're looking at the secondary. We're decent. We have some young players. We've got Eric Reed, a very good safety. He's not a young player, but he's good. He's probably our best secondary player right now. We just went out and got Richard Sherman, who's a proven good corner, not at his prime, but he will get the job done. He's a very good corner who can shut down a side of the field. We've got Ahkello Witherspoon, who's long. I'm not claiming that he's Deion Sanders, but he's long, he's young, he's improved, and he will get the job done, I think, at that right corner. But, of course, some competition at that spot will do no harm. It'll be good. We've also got Jaquiski Tart, another safety who is improved, but, again, not a star in this league by any stretch of the imagination. So with the number 9 pick, I do expect the 49ers to take a corner of some sort, whether that's Minkah Fitzpatrick, if he falls all the way to 9, who's probably the most complete secondary player in this draft, whether that is Denzel Ward of Ohio State, one of the best corners in the land. I want one of those two. I expect one of those two to be available, and I will be very surprised if they don't pick one of those two with the number 9 overall pick. What makes this selection very interesting, however, and what could present maybe problems to the secondary is the whole Reuben Foster situation. If you haven't heard about it, he's facing possible prison time for horrible accusations of domestic violence against his girlfriend. If these accusations are true, he should never be allowed to play football again for any team. He should be cut immediately, if even a little bit of this is true, because that's how horrible these accusations are. He should be in prison for what he did. Of course, I'm not going to speculate and say he's guilty before he's been proven guilty, innocent until proven guilty, of course, but it's definitely a bad situation with Reuben Foster with what we're hearing right now. And of course, this is not the more important side of the issue, but it also complicates the 49ers because they're not deep at the linebacker position. They were sort of relying on Reuben to be that anchor in the middle of the defense for years to come. And that suggests, because if Reuben Foster is gone, he's going to be cut, and like maybe if he has to go to prison, the 49ers also need a linebacker. I mean, yes, he's going to prison, which is the more pressing matter, but the 49ers also need someone to play in what will now be a very shallow linebacker position. And that means that maybe the 49ers are looking to take a talented linebacker for the second draft in a row in the first round. Remember, they got Reuben Foster late in the first round last year. So now you're looking at maybe a Roquan Smith, the linebacker out of Georgia. Very, very, very good, very talented. Would love to have him on. Any team would love to have him. Or Tremaine Edmonds, the fast, speedy, hard-hitting linebacker out of Virginia Tech. So we'll keep an eye on that. I do expect the 49ers to take a corner, but if anything really happens in these next 8 days regarding the Reuben Foster, anything major, don't be surprised if the 49ers take a linebacker, or definitely in the second round or in later picks, the 49ers should take care of that linebacker position. I also want to see, now this doesn't require a high pick, but I do want to see a wide receiver drafted by the 49ers, maybe a couple, because although the Corps are good right now with Pierre Garçon, we've got a deep threat. We've got Trent Taylor out of the slot, who I'm not a super believer in, but who's all right. He'll get the job done. We do need another wide receiver. I'm looking at Cortland Sutton out of SMU, a big possession guy who can maybe line up opposite our speedster Marquise Goodwin and be that sort of Dez Bryant. He's the first name that pops into my mind. By the way, the 49ers, if they went out and got Dez Bryant, very unlikely. I don't even think it would be a good move, but that would be a shockwave too. Dez Bryant was recently released by the Cowboys. He's He's on the older side. He'll probably demand a lot of money, so it's not the best move. I think a team that's more Super Bowl ready is going to want to go out and get him. But that's a situation to, of course, keep monitored, and I'm not going to be unhappy if he joins the 49ers. But Cortland Sutton, maybe Calvin Ridley, he'll probably be taken because he's so talented, the Alabama wide receiver. But definitely I want to see a wide receiver taken before round 5, maybe in that 3 to 4 range, because I just think that this wide receiving corps could be a little bit better. And now the offense is really what you're building on here in San Francisco with Jimmy G, so you want to give him weapons. Running back is also a major concern with the departure of Carlos Hyde, who I really, really, really liked, and I think we'll miss him a lot in San Francisco, more than people are giving him credit for. So we do have Breida, but it's gonna take another wide receiver. Shanahan should look for who really fits his mold of who he wants at running back, because maybe Carlos Hyde wasn't exactly what he wanted. If we look back at his Atlanta running backs when he coached the offense in Atlanta, he had Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, more speedster guys, less put your shoulders down and break through tackles. So that's something to keep eyes on. Running backs will probably be taken in this draft. But really the important positions are the secondary and linebacker. Offensive line is another problematic area, as our O-line was not good last year, and we're going to want to protect Jimmy G. I definitely see some linemen, maybe 1 or 2, being decided, which means that maybe a wide receiver will be foregone in exchange for those lineman picks. So I expect I almost said Warriors, the 49ers to select maybe a couple corners, a linebacker, a couple O-linemen, and then a running back, and then whatever is pressing need, maybe a D-lineman edge rusher, a project if they can get it with their draft. An exciting draft and a lot of holes on this roster to fill, so John Lynch does have some work to do. He should work closely with Kyle Shanahan to get the best roster that we can. I will, of course, have a recap of the NFL draft as it occurs in 8 days, all the 49ers selections, how they will impact the field, whether they were good or bad picks, and if there's a particularly bad draft, maybe you'll get a Woodruff Report rant. Those are always fun. So, this has been the Woodruff Report. I'm your host, David Woodruff. On this edition, we talked about the NBA playoffs with 2 games in the books in each series, and then transitioned and talked a little bit pre-draft, who the 49ers are probably going to pick, what needs they need to fill on their roster. Thank you so much for joining and listening to this edition of the Woodruff Report, and please listen again next week. I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun talking about it. See ya. Have a great weekend. Have a terrific week. And again, this has been the Woodruff Report.